How did the restrictions and the veil imposed on women in Islam emerge? An excerpt from Life of Mahomet from original sources. By Sir William Muir, 1894. 3rd edition. Since his marriage with Hafsa, that is for above a year, Mahomet had been content with the 3 inmates of his harem. He now added to the number 2 other wives. The first was Zainab, daughter of Khuzaimah, widow of his cousin Ubaidah, killed at Badr. Noted for her charity, she gained the title of Mother of the Poor. She survived but a year or 2, being the only one of the Prophet's wives, excepting Khadijah, who died before him. Rehana, the Jewess, also died a year before him, but it is doubtful whether she was ever more than his concubine. Within a month of this marriage, he sought the hand of a 5th wife. Salma was the widow of Abu Salma, to whom she had borne several children. Both had been exiles to Abyssinia, from whence they returned to Medina. At Oud, Abu Salma was wounded, but he had so far recovered as to take the command against the Beni Asad, when the wound broke out afresh. Mahomet visited his deathbed. He was breathing his last, and the women wailed loudly. "Hush," said the Prophet as he entered. "Invoke not on yourselves aught but what is good, for verily the angels are present with the dying man, and say Amen to that which ye pray. O Lord! Give unto him width and comfort in his grave, lighten his darkness, pardon his sins, raise him to paradise, exalt his rank among the blessed, and raise up faithful followers from his seed. Ye indeed are looking at the fixed eyes, but the sight itself hath already followed the dead." So saying, he drew the palm of his hand over the eyes of his departed friend, and closed them. It was 8 months after being wounded at Oud that Abu Salma died, and 4 months afterwards Mahomet made proposals of marriage to his widow, who though not young was very beautiful. She at first excused herself on the score of her age and rising family, but the Prophet removed her objection by saying that he too was well advanced in years, and that her children should be his care. After the marriage he tarried 3 days with his bride, a precedent followed by Moslem husbands when adding fresh inmates to their harems. Her son Omar was brought up by Mahomet. Mahomet was now near 60 years of age, but weakness for the sex seemed but to grow with age, and the attractions of his increasing harem instead of satisfying appear rather to have stimulated desire after new and varied charms. Happening one day to visit his adopted son Zayd, he found him absent. As he knocked, Zainab, his wife, now over 30 years of age, but fair to look upon, invited him to enter, and, starting up in her loose and scanty dress, made haste to array herself for his reception. But the beauties of her figure through the half-open door had already unveiled themselves too freely before the admiring gaze of Mahomet. He was smitten by the sight. "Gracious Lord," he exclaimed, "good heavens! How thou dost turn the hearts of men!" The rapturous words, repeated in a low voice as he turned to go, were overheard by Zainab, who perceived the flame she had kindled, and, proud of her conquest, was nothing loath to tell her husband of it. Zayd went straightway to Mahomet, and declared his readiness to divorce Zainab for him. This Mahomet declined. "Keep thy wife to thyself," he said, "and fear God." But Zayd saw probably that the admonition proceeded from unwilling lips, and that the Prophet had still a longing eye for Zainab. Perhaps he did not care to keep her when he found that she desired to leave him, and was ambitious of the new and distinguished alliance. And so he formally divorced her. Mahomet still hesitated. There might be little scandal according to Arab morals in seeking the hand of a married woman whose husband had no wish to keep her, but the husband in the present case was Mahomet's adopted son, and even in Arabia such a union was unlawful. The flame, however, would not be stifled, and so, casting his scruples to the winds, he resolved at last to have her. Sitting by Aisha, the prophetic ecstasy appeared to come over him. As he recovered, he smiled joyfully and said, "Who will go and congratulate Zainab, and say that the Lord hath joined her unto me in marriage?" His maid Salma made haste to carry the glad news to Zainab, who showed her delight by bestowing on the messenger all the jewels she had upon her person. Mahomet made no delay, but hastened to fulfill the divine behest, and, having made a great feast in the court of the mosque, took thus a second Zainab to be his wife. Zayd, her previous husband, was short and not well favored, having a pug nose, but he was 10 years younger than the Prophet. Zainab was industrious, and could tan leather and make shoes. What she made in this way, even after her marriage with the Prophet, was given away to the poor. She survived Mahomet 10 or 11 years. Tabari is the fullest of the earliest authorities on this passage, and in the text I have followed him closely. He gives a second narrative, differing only in this, that, as Mahomet waited at Zayd's door, the wind blew aside the curtain of Zainab's chamber and disclosed her in a scanty undress. After Zayd had divorced her, Mahomet asked him whether he had ever seen anything to dislike in her. Nothing, he replied, only good. Aisha relates that strange misgivings arose in her heart when she heard the divine message commanding the marriage, and, mindful of the beauty of Zainab, feared lest she should glory over the other wives of Mahomet as his divinely appointed bride. We learn from tradition that Zainab did thus vaunt herself, saying that God had given her in marriage to his prophet, whereas his other wives were given to him by their relatives. The marriage caused no small obloquy, and, to save his reputation, Mahomet had to fall back upon the oracle. A revelation appeared, in which a divine warrant is given for the union, the objections on the score of adoptive affinity are disallowed, and the prophet is even reprehended for his hesitation and fear of men. Hereby upon whom thou too hast bestowed favors means, Zayd, whom Mahomet, after freeing, had adopted. In the following verse he is mentioned by name, a singular instance, for no other follower is named in the Quran. Surah 33. God hath not given to a man two hearts within him. Nor hath he made your adopted sons your real sons. This your speech proceedeth from your mouths, but God speaketh the truth, and he directeth in the right way. Let your adopted sons go by their own fathers' names. This is more just with God. And when thou saidst to him on whom God hath bestowed favors, and upon whom thou too hast bestowed favors, keep thy wife to thyself, and fear God, and thou didst conceal in thy breast that which God was minded to make known, and thou fearedst man, whereas God is more worthy to be feared. And when Zayd had fulfilled her divorce, we joined thee with her in marriage, that there might hereafter be no offense to believers in marrying the wives of their adopted sons, when they have fulfilled their divorce, and the command of God is to be fulfilled. Mahomet is not the father of any man amongst you. Rather he is the apostle of God, and the seal of the prophets, and God knoweth all things. Strange to say, the scandal was removed by this revelation, and Zayd was thenceforward called not the son of Mahomet, as heretofore, but by his proper name, Zayd, the son of Harith. We hear of no doubts or questionings, and can only attribute the confiding spirit of his followers to the absolute ascendancy of his powerful mind over all who came within its influence. The seclusion of the veil or curtain was at this time enjoined upon the wives of Mahomet. Himself well stricken in years, surrounded by 6 wives, some of them sprightly, young, and beautiful, and with a continual concourse of courtiers, visitors, and suitors, such a restriction was not unneeded. Indeed, he had himself proved in the case of Zainab the danger that might arise from the too free admission of friends or strangers, and his followers could hardly expect to be freer from temptation than the Prophet himself. No one unless bidden was to enter his wives' apartments, they were not to be spoken to but from behind a curtain, and to slake the last embers of jealousy, or uneasiness as it is euphemistically called, an interdict is declared against their ever marrying again, even after his death. Henceforward they were known as the mothers of the faithful. Here is the passage. How has the fine gold become dim? O believers! Enter not the apartments of the Prophet, except ye be called to sup with him, without waiting his convenient time. When you are bidden, then enter, and when ye have eaten, then disperse. And stay not for familiar converse, for verily that giveth uneasiness to the Prophet. It shameth him to say this unto you, but God is not ashamed of the truth. And when ye ask anything of the Prophet's wives, ask it of them from behind a curtain, this will be more pure for your hearts and for their hearts. It is not fitting that ye should give uneasiness to the apostle of God, nor that ye should marry his wives after him forever. Verily that would be a grievous thing in the sight of God. The Prophet is nearer unto the believers than their own souls, and his wives are their mothers. Certain restrictions, but of a less stringent nature, were about the same time placed upon the dress and demeanor of all believing women. These were exposed in their walks abroad to the rude remarks of disaffected and licentious citizens. They were therefore commanded to throw their garments around them so as partially to veil their persons, and conceal their ornaments. The men who thus troubled the Moslem females were threatened with expulsion and with a general slaughter, thus: O Prophet! Speak unto thy wives and thy daughters, and the wives of the believers, that they throw around them a part of their mantles. This will be more seemly, that they may be known as women of reputation, and may not be subject to annoyance, for God is gracious and merciful. And truly, if the disaffected, and they in whose hearts is disease, of incontinency, and the propagators of falsehoods in the city, hold not back, we shall surely stir thee up against them. Then they shall not be permitted to live near unto thee therein but for a little. Accursed! Wherever they are found, they shall be taken and killed with a great slaughter. This is the wont of God concerning those that have gone before. And those shall not find in the wont of God any variation. And elsewhere. Surah 24. Speak unto the believing women that they restrain their eyes, and preserve their modesty, and display not their ornaments, except what appeareth thereof, and let them throw their veils over their bosoms, and let them not display their ornaments except to their husbands, fathers, and so on, enumerating a number of relations, and ending with slaves, eunuchs, and children. And let them not shake their feet that their hidden ornaments be discovered. Rules and precautions were also prescribed to regulate the visits of strangers to their neighbors' houses, and to prevent the privacy of believers being intruded upon without due warning. In Surah 24, believers are forbidden to enter any house but their own, even if there be no one inside, until they have first asked leave and saluted the family. During 3 periods of the day, before morning prayer, at the time of the siesta, and after evening prayer, even slaves and young children, who are otherwise accepted, must ask permission before entering an apartment. Women past childbearing may alone dispense with the outer garment. The sick, and certain near relatives, are also exempted from the prohibition of dining familiarly in each other's inner apartments. Out of these commands have grown the stringent usages of the harem and zenana, which, with more or less seclusion, prevail throughout the Moslem world. However degrading and austere these usages may appear, yet with the loose code of polygamy and divorce some restraints of the kind are almost indispensable in Islam, if only for the maintenance of decency and social order. European manners and customs in this respect would be altogether unsuited to Mahometan society. The tendency of the system without its present checks would certainly be unfavorable to morality. Let the laxity of manners be conceived, if with unrestricted social intercourse there existed also under the sanction of divine revelation the practice of polygamy, divorce, and remarriage, if the marriage bond were simply at the discretion of the husband to hold or to break, if any man might look upon any married woman, relatives excepted, as within his reach by marriage, and if every married woman felt like Zainab, that she might become the lawful wife of any other man who could persuade her husband to pronounce a divorce, the foundations of society would be broken up. A goodly row of modest dwellings, one for each of the mothers of the faithful, now formed the eastern side of the mosque and of its court. Mahomet shared his attentions equally amongst his wives, spending thus a day and night in the chamber of each successively. Thus their turn was known as the day of Sauda, the day of Zainab, and so on. Yet Aisha maintained her preeminence, and, however much there may have been the formal circuit reducing nominally her portion to 1 day in 6, still hers was the most frequented of all the houses, and best deserved the name of home. The irregularity of his attentions at length provoked a natural discontent, and Mahomet was by a divine dispensation released from the obligation of consorting with his wives equally and in undeviating order. Postpone the turn of such as thou mayest please, and admit unto thyself her whom thou choosest, as well as her whom thou mayest desire of those whom thou hadst put aside, it will be no offence in thee. This will be easier, that they may be satisfied, and not repine, but be all content with that thou givest unto them. A passage follows probably of a later stage, for in this surah are collected a great variety of precepts, of different periods, relating to the treatment of women. No more women are lawful unto thee after this, nor that thou shouldest exchange any of thy wives for others, even though their beauty fascinate thee, excepting such slaves as thy right hand may possess, and God observeth all things. Some commentators think that this prohibition was abrogated by a preceding verse, which makes lawful to the Prophet in marriage any of his maternal or paternal cousins, and any believing woman who might willingly give herself to him in case he desired to take her to wife. Others say that the passage was revealed after his number of 9 wives was completed. In the latter case, it is to be noted that cohabitation with slaves as concubines, in addition to his regular wives, is still permitted. The command was incorporated in the Quran. Whether Mahomet intended that it should be so, we have no means of judging, and to this day it is recited in its course, as part of the Word of God, in every mosque throughout Islam.